Near-death experiences are not the result of a lack of oxygen to the brain. They're not caused by medications. They're not inventions of the mind after the fact. They're, in fact, the dying experience. So that then, I think, validates all the other spiritual experiences surrounding death and dying. Premonitions of death, the shared dying experience, after-death communications. Those things we can't really study scientifically, but if the near-death experience is real, then the premonitions of death are real. And people who have these experiences, by and large, agree. I'll give you an example. I think I talked to you before about this young boy. His parents were ski instructors. They were coming down off of the Cascade Mountains in the Seattle area, and their car skidded on ice and flipped over a guardrail into a river below. And he was underwater for 45 minutes before he was resuscitated. And he told me about that he was in a huge noodle. Then he goes, well, it can't be a noodle. Must have been a rainbow, And then he says to me, but was it real? Was my experience real? Because if it was real, you have to tell all the old people, he knows it's the dying experience. Okay. So his mother then says to me, well, if his experience is real, then my experience is real too. And she said, I've never really had the courage to believe that what happened to me was real. And here's what happened to her. She was in the passenger seat of the car. Her husband was driving, and 2 children were in the back seat. One child, unfortunately, did not survive. And then Chris was resuscitated. She was able to free herself she was able to kick out the windshield of the car and then swim to the surface. And rescuers were there by then, and they pulled her to safety. And they pulled her to the side of the river. And she looks up, to her left, and there's her husband. And he's sitting on a rock, and he's looking down at what's going on. And he's as real as this experience that we're having. He seemed completely real to her. And he says to her, don't be concerned. Everything is all right. Everything is happening just as it's supposed to happen. And this was infuriating to her. She's like, my children are in the car. My husband has somehow mysteriously gotten out, and he's just telling me to relax. Don't worry about it. Everything's okay. And she becomes furious and starts to scream at him. And then he vanishes. And in fact, he was trapped in the car. Although she was able to kick out the windshield, he was not able to free himself, for the airbag and such as that. So, she had, basically an after-death communication. And she intuitively felt, if Chris's experience is real, then my experience is real. And I agree with her. I think that, it really validates all of these types of experiences. And that's important, AJ, because these experiences contain the seeds of healing. And they can provide tremendous comfort as long as they're recognized for what they are. That, so if you're just going to dismiss this as a grief-induced hallucination, if you're just going to think, this is just some crazy, dream or fantasy, well, then obviously it's not going to plant any seeds of healing. But if you understand that it's a real experience, then, that can then, I'm saying plant a seed of healing. I'm not saying that they're going to necessarily, struggling with the loss of a child or the loss of a spouse is obviously devastating. But nevertheless, these experiences, AJ, gives us a sense of meaning, because that's in fact what he was saying to her. Her, husband's spirit or whatever it was saying to her, this was meant to happen. So The reason that people descend into pathological grief is that their life is destroyed and turned upside down and no longer has meaning. Everything that creates meaning in her life, being a mother, having children, being a wife, all of those things are what contribute to our sense of meaning. She's lost it all. And yet she's being told, yes, there is meaning in life. There was a meaning, whatever it is, for this catastrophic event.
In the car, you said there were her children plus her husband. Did both children die too?
No, Chris Eggleston was rescued, and unfortunately, his brother was not.
So two people died.
Yeah.
On that accident.
The husband was trapped in the car and could not free himself, and one child.
What other cases have you really impacted you that would be interesting to know?
I'll tell you one of the most interesting experiences, which really, I think, illustrates what I'm trying to say to you. At the time that I did this research, I was doing a lot of critical care work, but I also had a private practice and I was very busy. And, I was seeing, 30, 40 patients a day, sort of a typical pediatric practice. And this couple comes in to see me. They made an appointment to see me at my practice. And I said, how can I help you today? And they said, well, it's been, 1,983 days since our son died. And we would like to, we want to learn from you, what you can tell us about your research on near-death experiences. And I found out that they had been to all sorts of, they had been to Raymond Moody's weekend, and they'd been to Brian Weiss's weekend. And, they're searching desperately for meaning. And so right then I got called to the hospital, for a mother was, her placenta was separating, and the baby had to be born immediately. So I was called over to the hospital. And I ran over there and, resuscitated the newborn, and it went very smoothly. And then as I was writing my note, one of the nurses says to me, "Who's the medical student who's with you today?" And I said, there's no medical student. The students were with me today. And the parents had given me a picture of their son that I had just sort of thought, mindlessly had just sort of picked up and taken over to the hospital, not really, thinking. And she looks at the picture and says, "Yeah, that's him. That's who was with you today." And I went back to the parents and I told them this story. And I said, maybe your son is trying to talk to you, but your grief and your despair and your seeking answers is, preventing him from getting through. And, I gave them a few simple techniques, journaling, when you go to bed at night. I think it's helpful to ask a sincere question and then write the first thought that you have when you wake up. Whether you wake up 2 hours later or you wake up, 8 hours later, to quickly write that thought down. And then if you, do that for a couple of weeks, you find some interesting patterns. And I also encourage them to create a ritual that can be very helpful. He was a teenage boy, he died in a motorcycle accident. And they had a little ritual when he would get home from school. That's the time his mother and him would talk. So I said, maybe that's a good time that you could just, be quiet by yourself, at that time. So they went home, and the mother called me a couple of months later, and she said to me that night was the first time she had slept in 1,983 days, or whatever, however many days it was. But here's what she told me, HA. She said, actually, every night when I would like wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I would see him at the foot of my bed. And he would be saying to me, Mommy, I'm okay. Stop crying. I'm all right now. She said, but I just thought that was some crazy dream. I just thought that was, I never even considered it, until we had come to your office and had talked to you, and you shared with us, that's that experience that the nurse had, that the nurse seemed to see our son, around you. These experiences often have their own validation. They have their own, they have contained in them are the seeds which, give a message. Yes, this is real. If the person who's grieving has the courage to believe it. And frequently they don't, for the obvious reason that, when you've suffered this kind of loss, you don't want to be, pandered to or catered to, or, you don't want to just sort of believe the easy answer. That if something seems too good to be true, by and large, we're of the mindset, probably not true. So here's an example, though, of what I'm talking about, is that this mother, she had a dream that her son looked like a Ninja Turtle. And it was a dream that was vividly real, very different than any sort of dream that she had. It's what they call a lucid dream. She dreamed she was wide awake, and there wasn't sort of the fragmentary nature of the dream. It seemed entirely real to her, and her mother and her son was appearing to her and saying, look, Mom, I'm a Ninja Turtle. Okay. Several weeks later, she's taking him home from school, and she's making a left-hand turn across a busy highway, and she tragically does not judge how fast the cars are going, and they crash right into him. So he's in the back seat on the passenger side, and the car gets T-boned, and he's severely injured, and ultimately, after a prolonged hospital stay, dies. And, of course, this is devastating to her. However, when he was in the hospital, he had so many injuries that he was like, he had like all kinds of, casts all over his body. It was, full, trunk cast and arms, etc. And his mom was sitting there with him one night, and the nurse comes in and says, oh, doesn't he look like a Ninja Turtle? And just sort of says, yeah, he's our Ninja Turtle. And she never thought anything of it until she had read about my near-death research and read my first book, was Closer to the Light. And she had that same intuition. Well, if the near-death experience is real, then this was real. And, that this was some sort of premonition that she doesn't really know what it means, but it does give a hint that there is meaning, that there's meaning to her son's death, that somehow it's fitting in with some sort of plan that he came to her in a dream, and essentially said, look, Mom, I'm a Ninja Turtle, but seemed happy, and that can again plant the seeds of healing.
You mentioned that there are certain techniques, journaling. The other was creating a ritual. And there's another thing that you have posted on Facebook, and that I have seen other people mention it, is that when they find like a dime, for example, they take it as a message from the deceased person, in this case, your mother. So can you tell us about these techniques, and also why the dime represents your mother.
I was blessed that I was able to care for my mother in the last year of her life. She had severe Alzheimer's and eventually, died of really severe dementia. And I had told her, Mom, don't leave me. I can't bear for you to leave me. And she said to me, well, I will never leave you. And I'll leave you at times so that you'll know that I'm there. And I think that my mother chose dimes because there's something tangible that, I'm the sort of person, I think, that if I saw my mother standing at the foot of my bed and saying I'm okay, I probably would just think that's some crazy hallucination, even though I try to encourage other people to take those things as real. I don't know. I have a sense of skepticism in me that it just sort of is constantly there. And so I have to tell you, AJ, that in my life, at times of tremendous stress and times where, I need my mother's love, for lack of any other way of saying it, dimes appear. And dimes have appeared to me in places where there are no dimes, where it can't be explained by, that somebody casually dropped a dime or something like that. So these dimes have occurred to me in places where there are no dimes. That it can only be seen as a message from my mother. These experiences, though, in my case, is something very tangible because I need something tangible. But I'll give you another example of I was lecturing at Cincinnati at the Children's Hospital there. And a young resident had the job of driving me back to the airport after my lecture. And I was telling her, oh yeah, people after these kinds of experiences, they see dimes and they, as Christmas cactuses bloom out of season. And, I was sort of just talking about this. I was much younger then. And just sort of, talking about it very clinically, as if I'm describing the symptoms of strep throat or something like that. And I didn't see the look on her face as that she became increasingly agitated as I spoke. And she finally looks at me and she says, so I guess you don't want to hear my story. And I had realized that that's why she had chosen and volunteered to drive me to the hospital, because she wanted to share this story with me. And here's her story. She was a resident. Residents in those days worked often 36-hour shifts. I did as a resident as well. And after one such shift, she picked up her son at daycare and then was in a terrible car accident that was just, a one driver car accident, ran into a bridge abutment, and her son was killed. And this, similar to the story I told you before, there's a horrific event. And she was, obviously crushed by this. She fell asleep at the wheel, and that's what caused this accident. So she dropped out of her residency program and just was, floundering. Was married, was not, not functioning as a wife anymore. What I was telling you about, real pathological grief, until they had one of these Christus cactuses. I've never had one of them, so I don't know. But apparently, people that have them, they're really into them, and they bloom. I don't know why I guess they bloom more towards Thanksgiving time than Christmas, but they bloom the same time every year, and people that have these cactuses really, look forward to it, etc. However, that year, their Christmas cactus did not bloom until the spring, on the very day, the anniversary of her son's death. And that was enough to then, flip a switch in her and to say, wait a minute, this is a message from my son. My son is trying to tell me that life is still blooming, that there still is, growth, that I have to cut this out. And she went back to her residency program. And then, she was in her third year when she told me this story as she was driving back to the hospital. So these kinds of experiences happen, and they have to be paid. We have to pay attention to them and honor them. I'll tell you what one of my professors used to say, AJ. He used to say, this is when I was at Johns Hopkins. So they were all real professors there, in that sort of professorial style. And he would say, if you believe in coincidence, and if you're going to attribute, events to just coincidence, that is the refuge of the lazy mind. And I think that applies to this issue of, the Christmas cactuses that bloom out of season, because I know that, I read, Skeptics and the Skeptical Inquirer, I don't think they're really skeptics. They're people, they're professional doubters. They already have a point of view, and they're imposing it, no different than as somebody that's a believer. They just happen to believe, I guess, in, materialism and nothing. And they like to say, well, it was just a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. So the two techniques that I find are useful in working with grieving parents one is journaling. And the point of journaling is, before you go to bed at night, ask, whoever, the universe, whatever God you believe in, whatever it is, ask them a sincere question. This has to be a sincere question. But, sometimes we have to fake it till we make it too. Sometimes you have to just ask a question. But I mean, the typical question is, what's going on with my son? Is my son okay? What happens after we die? That type of question. And then the first thing when you wake up, whether you wake up at 2 a.m. or whether you wake up in the morning, you have a journal at your bedside with a pen. Write down the first thing that you think, not the second, not the third, but the very first thing. And don't even bother to analyze it after just once or twice. But after a couple of weeks, read back and see if you see a pattern. And I've seen remarkable results from this. I told you the one story of the parents that did this, and really the journaling just sort of led them to believe that what their own senses were telling them, that their son was appearing at the foot of their bed and saying, Mommy, I'm okay, stop crying. But I've seen parents, for example, who their child is dying of leukemia, and the child had wanted to see The Lion King as one of the, something that they wanted to, was meant something to them before, but unfortunately, the course of their illness was such that they couldn't see The Lion King. So the parents then went to see it anyway. And the circumstances were such that a parking place opened up unexpectedly so that they could get to The Lion King on time. So that's what happened. But it wasn't until they started to just do this journaling that then this realization came to them. Oh, it wasn't a coincidence that this parking place opened up, just suddenly, but that this was some sort of message from, our universe, from our daughter, from something, to give them the sense that, again, that there's meaning in life. And that was an insight that came to them through this journaling process. And it's just, I think that that's an example of the kinds of insights that they come to. And the reason you write down the first thought that you have is because typically these insights come from a place that is not your rational left brain. That's why I said, don't think your second thought, don't think your third thought, because those are going to be your rational brain trying to make up something, that is intellectually pleasing or, makes you feel better. But that first thought will often then lead to counterintuitive and unexpected insights. So that's the first technique. The second technique is to find a time or an event or something in your life that had meaning to you and your loved one who's passed. The example I gave you before was when this teenager got home from school. That was a time that he and his mother would talk, and that was an important time for them. So that's a good time then to create a ritual, to just 3:15 to 3:45. Spend some time, just spend that time thinking about in that case their son, and that time thinking about what the grieving process is all about, what the meaning of this is. And that is an important thing, because then it helps to prevent pathological grieving, because it creates a place to grieve. And then that the rest of your life, well, I mean, I'm not saying, obviously you're always going to be tinged by this, but then there's a rest of your life that you don't necessarily have to always feel the burden of grieving. And it's in those times where, again, these insights can come to you that can be healing. So those are two techniques that I think are very helpful.
Well, thank you, Dr. Morse. It was a pleasure having you, and I think these two techniques will help a lot of people. Also, all the testimonials from the people you have treated are really impressive, and I think they can also help a lot of people who hear about them. Thanks a lot, and I hope to have you back soon.
I hope so too, AJ. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much.